Good afternoon. My name's Darren Woolley. I'm the CEO of Trinity P3 and welcome to this Trinity P3 webinar. The title, How to Manage Agency Productivity and Performance to Drive Value. I'm joined by two terrific guests, Shane and James from ExactAI, who are here to share their perspective on ways that agencies can and why agencies should be looking to improve their productivity. The bit of housekeeping first. We're starting right at 4 p.m. Australian Eastern Summer Time or Daylight Savings Time. To ask questions, please use the Q&A function. You can be anonymous if you wish. And you can ask questions all the way through. We'll be probably addressing most of your questions as we go through, but happy to, and we have a Q&A session towards the end. We are recording this and it will be available within the next 24 hours. I'll give you more details on that later in the webinar. So to our agenda for today. First of all, how do current agency fee models don't encourage productivity gains? And this is particularly an issue that I've been talking about for a long time. And I really want to get James and Shane to take us through that, because we see constantly the current remuneration model is one that actually in many ways rewards poor productivity. We're also going to address why technology is both a hindrance and a help. And I'm looking forward to hearing about that. And also how intelligent automation changes productivity. Because I think for a lot of people, they think of productivity as just better ways of working together. But in actual fact, there's more than just communications. There's so many ways that technology can help that. And also they're going to share with us 7 keys to unlocking the potential of intelligence automation. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, James and Shane, to take us through how to improve productivity for an agency.
Great. Good afternoon. And Darren, thanks so much for having us this afternoon. Really looking forward to talking to everybody about productivity and intelligent automation and hearing what everybody's questions are. I think the first thing to say is, by introduction for us, ExactAI, I mean, James and I, we're obsessed with making advertising and marketing work more interesting and productive by getting rid of waste and admin. That's really what drives us. And that's what's kind of led us into what we're working here. Today, we won't be talking about a lot of the things that you hear about when you talk about productivity, about personal productivity. How do I make myself seem to work harder? And we won't be talking about Slack. A lot of the kind of conversation around productivity in recent years has been around workflow and communication tools and those sorts of things. So we won't be talking about that. So what we'll be talking about, though, is more structured productivity. How does the structure of an organization and the way that it uses its tools, how does that unlock productivity gains? So great. So let's jump into the first slide. One of my favorite Tom Fishburne cartoons about how agency fee models are geared around efficiency. So here, when we talk about efficiency, it's really important to talk about the difference between efficiency and productivity. Efficiency is about how do I do the same thing, but with less resource. Productivity is about how do I do more things with the existing resource that I have. In many ways, agencies, we think we're trying to do both things at the same time. But in fact, what we've really been focused in agency models is trying to do more production, produce more things, smaller things with less resources we've gone through here. So Darren, I wondered if you wanted to jump in with your thoughts here as well.
Well, we've actually been tracking this, Shane, and myself and Michael Farmer, my business partner in the US, he actually has numbers going back to 1995. But typically around the start of this century or this millennia, the average brand was producing around 200 to 250 pieces of work for each brand per year. Today, we're seeing a typical brand, because of things like social media and digital advertising, producing 3,000 to 5,000 outputs. Now, this is for creative agencies or digital agencies. On the media side, we're seeing a huge fragmentation in media campaign activity through things like always on and programmatic buying. So, you know, more money is spent in more channels than ever before.
So, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, we're seeing a normal agency in a weekly time by digital buy using upwards of 25 different platforms. So that's 25 different platforms that they have to log in independently. They have to download independent data. They then have to upload that data into a single source. And because a lot of that data doesn't match up, there's revenue loss because of that data doesn't align with what the marketer and the brand actually need to make informed decisions. And one of the bigger issues that we're seeing is the industry churn. It's never been higher.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that takes us kind of into the next slide. So I think, you know, with this, as James is explaining, if you're working every day and you're having to go in and out of different platforms and you're doing lots of different smaller tasks, that task switching in itself is a huge burden. As James mentioned, I think it was the 4 A's in the US. They did a study with LinkedIn about a year and a half ago, because LinkedIn had found that marketing, along with HR, funnily enough, are two of the professions with the highest rate of staff turnover globally, people wanting to change jobs. And they really wanted to understand why. And one of the interesting things they found is that half of people who leave work in agencies said that they didn't find the work challenging enough. In other words, they found it boring or tedious. And so we asked ourselves the question, well, where does that boredom and tedium come from? And a lot of it is about doing all these smaller tasks that are involved in creating these smaller and smaller units of production that we need to do. And of course, there are other, you know, unintended consequences that come from it. I think you were talking about units of production there, and Darren as well. So when the focus is always on efficiency, then of course then the focus is always going to be on price. What is the price of that unit of production, and what's particularly the lowest price I can get?
And Shane, you know, I see up there you've got the Adweek survey that said 40% of brands might seek new agencies next year. And certainly all of the predictions are for 2021 to be a pitch palooza. Now, the problem is that we've virtually had 10 years of a race to zero. And it always amazes me that when marketers say they want to find a new agency because their existing one is underservicing, not proactive, not doing all of the extra things that they want them to do, and yet they go to a tender and procurement or even marketing, will be wanting to have a successful outcome, see a 10 to 15% reduction in fees. Now, you could only deliver that if you're improving productivity. But what
absolutely,
really
so this is the dichotomy that I was talking there. We're pitching for efficiency, but what we really want is productivity. We want to get more outputs and better outputs for what we're looking for. So that's the challenge. People say, well, can you do both at the same time? It's very difficult to drive efficiency and improve productivity at the same time.
Exactly.
So let's jump on to the next slide. I think this sums it up. I think many of us are familiar with the old adage of boiling the frog. For those people out there who care about animals, I made sure I didn't get an image of actually boiling a frog. But we have seen this temperature rising on us in agency land, and on marketers as well, with the intensification of the outputs they're looking for. And really, it's cooking us, and something really does need to change. As you said, Darren, it's been a long process in terms of getting here. And we do wonder at what point can we get that unit cost even lower? Do we juniorize further? Do profit margins get shaved even further? Do we casualize our workforce? So I think we've reached that point now. And I think in the pandemic is hopefully an opportunity in the post-pandemic world to bring about change. You mentioned that stat about agencies looking for, brands looking for new agencies. I hope that the terms of reference that they'll be looking for, hopefully we can begin to change those to be more productivity orientated. But let's jump into the next slide. So I wanted to ask you, Darren, is what, from your perspective, is standing in the way of changing these fee models?
Part of it is actually on the marketing side and the other part is on the agency side. But let's start with the agencies, because what we typically see when we have conversations around moving to a value-based model is incredible fear of the unknown. You know, agencies since around 95, when media commissions globally started to disappear and agencies went to a direct resource model, the accounting system went to a overhead or cost recovery model, that if I had a person and I knew that they were costing me X dollars plus overhead plus profit, all I had to do was recover that cost, overhead and profit, and I'd be in front. Now, what's actually happened is that that's fine in a very simple world where you just, basically on-selling resources. But we're living in an incredibly complex marketing world where scopes of work extrapolate and very few resource plans are actually put to a scope of work. Most people are saying, well, I had 15 or 50 people or 500 people working on my business last time. Can I do it with 10% less? With no relation to what the work is that those people are actually doing. The other thing is that if you're just paying on head hours and not a retainer, we've seen incredible cases where agencies have taken a large amount of time to do things as well. Like it almost rewards them because they can charge more hours if they're slower to do it. And that's, we often use that as a way in a pitch of working out the true value of the agency is the cost of delivering something, not just the cost per hour that they charge. On the client side, the clients are in a great position and they're not willing to acknowledge that the current model rewards them, because while they say they're fearful of overpaying the agency, they do know that on the retainer model, all you have to do is agree a retainer and then just keep loading work in there until the agency screams. And that if they move to a model where they actually pay for the value, it might end up costing them more. Because we also have to remember in that same period, in the last 10 to 15 years, marketing budgets have actually gone backwards in most cases in real terms. So they've got more things to do than ever before because there's more channels, and fear of missing out means that they want to be in every channel. I mean, every time I read another headline about how do I get into TikTok, I go, my God, this world, marketing world's gone crazy. But it just means that they're having to do more and more things. So I think those two things, the marketers don't want to change because deep down, I think they know the current model works to their favor. And agencies don't want to change because they're fearful of being worse off than they are at the moment. And it's much easier just sticking with what they know.
Right, so there's some barriers there. And I think, well, hopefully, over the course of the next kind of 20 minutes or so, we are going to share one or two ideas which perhaps people hadn't thought of to try to break that bit of an impasse. Because clearly, if we keep on going the way that we are, then we're going to keep on getting what we're getting, which is more of this kind of ad factory kind of feel that we're getting in marketing and advertising departments, where people, as we've seen earlier, are feeling like the work isn't rewarding. And they're not being adequately rewarded for what they have to do. Shall we jump back into the slides, Darren?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So here we're talking about possibly the other side of it, looking at it from the marketer's point of view. So we talked about, you were talking there earlier about how the marketer will give as much work as possible to the agency until the agency screen. But the reality is just in this particular graphic, there's 30 discrete different areas in this one graphic in digital that marketers might be thinking about, whether it's in terms of their reach or engagement or conversion if they're in e-commerce there. And each one of these areas is important. You know, your shopping cart is as important as your landing page, as important as your keywords, as well as your up funnel work, as well as your CRM. So nothing can really be neglected. And the point that we're making here is as we, in that wonderful image that you see to your left, which is a pizza burger, for those who are wondering, is that as we consume more and more of these digital calories, as we call it here, that it reduces our ability to be flexible. It gives us this kind of this notion of we're calling of tech bloat, where we are weighed down of all the different things that we need to do. And of course, that makes us much more task orientated. So this has led to, next slide is great there. Thanks, Darren. To people like who we're going to call Bob here. Now, Bob is an operations or person or a marketing technologist. And interestingly, 5 or 6 years ago, this role didn't exist. This idea of a person within an organization whose job it is to look at all of these different MarTech platforms and other systems within an organization and find the best way to make them all go together. But in a way, it's not surprising. You were mentioning, Darren, how advertising budgets have reduced. They've reduced as MarTech budgets, of course, have increased. I think Gartner 2 years ago saw a peak of around about 29% of budgets being spent there. It's fallen back a little bit in the last survey that they did, but it's set to increase. Most CMOs are expecting to increase their budget on MarTech. And what you need is, of course, you need individuals to maximize the efficiency of that. So organizations like Gartner and Forrester now are producing lots and lots of tools and research that people can buy to try to optimize what they're doing there. But I think what's interesting about the Bobs of the world is that there is an equivalent, of course, within agencies. There are agency people who are there optimizing their ad tech platforms in particular, less so with some of the legacy tools. But of course, what we have to remember is whilst this is all going on, the major platform players like Adobe and Google, they're really focused on getting as much of their relationships being directly with the end client and not so much with the agency.
I mean, I think if you look at the majority of brands now, much of the first-party data, the CRM-based solutions have now moved back in-house. And businesses like Google, Adobe, Accenture, Oracle, Salesforce, they're looking to ring-fence the market. So they want to not only supply technology, but they're now building out strategic teams, implementation, experiential-based teams. And for them, it's around making sure there's a one-stop shop, not that different than what agencies were doing 10 to 15 years ago. The issue here, though, is it limits brands' agility, their flexibility to move. Darren, you talked about pivot a minute ago. It's not so much around pivoting, it's about making sure they can go in different directions based on market needs and wants. And that's something that will limit brands as they start to increase their threshold of using one or two technologies only, which is why people like Bob have become really important.
And we just wanted to reinforce that point. We believe that the role of agencies, of course, isn't just to provide the expertise and the services, but of course is about providing marketing capacity that provides marketers and brands with flexibility to scale up and down as is necessary. So it has that really important role. The more that we take that resource in-house, the less flexibility that marketers will have. So now we've kind of got the Bobs of the world with this investment in marketing technology. What that kind of really makes us think about is saying, well, what does that do to our work time? How are we actually spending our time? So let's jump onto that next slide there, Darren. I couldn't help it. I had to put another Tom Fishburne cartoon in there. And this one was produced, I think, in the beginning of the pandemic when people are working from home. And everybody seemed to be focused on this so-called additional time that they had at their disposal. And everyone was doing a new hobby, growing bonsai trees or digital upskilling because they were worried about their job. And I think there was a large percentage of us were actually thinking, oh my God, I'm just still trying to keep it together. And the reason is actually it's quite difficult to spend as much time as you might want to staying on a task. So here in ExactAI, we have a methodology when we work with our clients to actually look at how each individual in their organization spends time. And, you know, we've all seen there's surveys that people say, oh, look, we're bogged down with email, we waste our time in unproductive meetings. We actually quite like meetings where people are communicating and interacting and sharing ideas. We less like meetings where people are simply exchanging data without a particular insight. And so what we've done is we've classified work time, and we look at productive time when you're working on your on a task and producing something, administration and waste, copying, pasting, checking, you know, reporting, those types of tasks, and then recognizing that all organizations have a percentage of time where employees are simply being people. So this might be us interacting around the water cooler, it might be taking vacation, calling childcare, and of course, just for our overseas people on this webinar, that does change from country to country as well, the amount of time that is devoted to around that personal time. What we found in Australia, just around the major media holding groups, nearly 40% of time of an employee is spent on admin and waste. And if we translate that to an average employee cost, we're talking about $155 million that is spent on activities that don't add value to customers and certainly don't enable agencies to grow and to focus on doing the things that they want to do and to move forward.
And Shane, this is why moving to a value-based model where agencies are being rewarded for creating value, i.e. the outputs that they create or the services that they provide are of value, actually will then start to break the nexus of this. Because at the moment, a billable hour is a billable hour, where no matter where it falls in those three categories, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, this also, in a way, it encourages us to do that type of task-based work where we know we can complete a task in a particular period of time and we will get paid for it. That gives us organizational certainty in terms of our revenue, rather than something which might have a more unpredictable outcome and assume risk. So the question then becomes, of course, is, well, if you do address that admin and waste, well, what do you do with that time? And we believe that if you're able to address some of that time, then perhaps you can move in that direction of performance-based. Perhaps it might be a case of part of your remuneration is based on that retainer model, and then you have some skin in the game. And we're certainly, in talking to many of our clients, I'm sure you're doing the same, we're starting to see an increase in those types of arrangements.
I know, Darren, I think you put yours into three pots, going from sort of treading water all the way through to sort of business remuneration. I think again, going back to your point around output, one of the good things about output is it makes agencies change the model. So we talk about technology and managing technology. We talk about reporting and how much time is used. If we are now moving to a output-based solution, all of those systems and processes need to be adhered to and changed, so that they can make themselves not just more agile, but more productive and more efficient. And that at the moment hasn't happened.
Yeah, and yeah, James, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've actually had agencies say to me either that they've invested in technology to make their teams more productive, but in making them more productive, it took less hours to do something, which gave them more time to actually think and refine and improve. When the client found out, they wanted to reduce the fees that they were paying, because if you became 20% more productive, that got interpreted, to your point, Shane, as 20% more efficient. So we're going to reduce your fee. Now, that acts, the marketers and their procurement teams are actually actively stopping people becoming more productive by holding them to an efficiency model rather than a productivity model. Our perspective is, if you produce a piece of work of the standard required and you do it in less time, then you shouldn't be penalized for doing that.
Correct. And I think this is where I think as an industry, we have fallen victim to this interchanging of these terms of between efficiency and productivity. If all we do is focus on productivity, then that by definition means that we're going to continue to create this output, but for less resource. That's the ambition of that. If our ambition, if you're a brand and you want to gain greater market share and competitive advantage, the role of your agency needs to be that, and to enable them to do that, they need to be productive so that they can focus on ways to differentiate your brand and to give you that competitive advantage that you need. Now, not everybody, of course, shares our view of that, and in fact, Forrester recently caused a bit of a kerfuffle. I think it was in October with their report, which is on the next slide, was reported on around the world, where they predicted that due to automation and AI, the introduction of these systems into advertising agencies, that advertising agencies themselves would shrink, and shrink substantially, by 11% in 2023, and by a third over the next decade. And you can see some quite significant figures there. They also went on to say that they would see a fragmentation. They would start to see a greater rise in more specialized shops. So as a brand, you've got now this prospect of more agencies to manage and to orchestrate as well, and more reporting and more data as well. I can't say I agree with their take on that fundamentally, because it talks to efficiency. We have a view that if, on the one hand, in our earlier graphic, marketers are already themselves struggling under the weight of systems and platforms and tasks that they have to do, surely if agencies are able to be more productive and actually achieve more work, wouldn't you simply use that resource that's available to you?
And look, Shane, I think part of the problem here is that agencies for a long time have not been charging for the strategic thinking and the creative thinking. Most of the remuneration has been coming for the doing. Now, the technology productivity improvements is about reducing the mundane work for individuals, freeing them up to do more of the smart thinking. This is, again, another challenge for agencies to get their clients, the marketers, to realize that having people actually thinking about their business, thinking about better ways, better strategies, how to optimize and produce results, beyond, and allow the technology to optimize. I think what Forrester's doing here is just applying a efficiency gain through technology and saying, well, it's going to shrink. I think if agencies play it right and can work out how to position this, it will actually allow agencies to invest. It may be less employees, but they may be getting paid more because they're the best and brightest, which are the ones that the industry has been losing, especially to the tech companies.
Well, if you look what's happened over since our friends from Group N with centralisation. But I would love to say that centralisation was the holy grail and the saviour of an agency. But two of the big issues with centralisation is it's a short-term goal from a revenue perspective. What we're seeing is inefficiencies as they start to move more and more of that middle office and back office task into a central-based solution. But from a more practical perspective, we're seeing distrust, dissatisfaction from many of the sort of senior-based C-suite execs, where they are starting to lose control of their businesses. And what that has a knock-on effect to is the really, really good people that you want to drive brands, businesses, strategic direction, making sure they're coming up with all the really good, creative, effective ideas, no longer have that control. So one of the big things that needs to happen is, how do we take centralization but make it into an effective solution. And I think we haven't quite got there just yet.
Yeah.
And James, I think one of the issues with centralisation is that once they get beyond economy of scale, getting the efficiencies through economy of scale, then it relies heavily on low-cost workforces. And as we've seen around the world, the traditional low-cost workforces, the quality and cost of living is rapidly increasing. So where are you going to move to? I mean, this is a zero-sum game, that approach, whereas embracing the availability of technology to actually minimize that mundane work is actually absolutely sustainable.
Yes, and so that's where we're going to talk about next. We're going to get to the bit about what is intelligent automation. What does it mean to process it? Because in a way, an intelligent automation is a bit like having a digital worker or a robot worker. They don't take any holiday, they don't sleep, they don't get sick, and they don't complain. And they're very cost effective. So what we want to do now is just for those people who are a bit unfamiliar with some of the technologies and terms around intelligent automation, I'm going to try to just give you a very quick brief overview of what it is. Intelligent automation is one of those kind of basket terms that, depending on who's selling what, they will describe different types of technology and software in it. But generally there are, and as depicted by these three cartoons here, which are kind of Wizard of Oz, we have esque, if you like. We have our robot on our left who don't do much thinking, and they do things like scraping forms and helping with employee onboarding. And there are various ways you can do this, from cloud-based systems to things that literally sit on your desktop and mimic the tasks that you do, so you don't have to do them yourselves. Where it starts to get interesting is as we move across to the right, and what CA stands for is this idea of cognitive automation. And this is, by cognitive, it's the same senses that we have. It can look at things and recognize an object or an image or a piece of text, and to understand what it is. It can interpret that text through natural language processing, and then it uses machine learning so it knows what to do with that information. And then finally, I guess the heart part of it as well is, behind intelligent automation is these deep learning AI systems, which are taking in vast amounts of data and understanding patterns and relationships with it to develop new insights. And these are these artificial neural networks that you might have heard about that mimic the way that the mind works. When you put them all together, all of these tools mean, in very simple terms, we can look across an organization's or a group of organizations, in the case of a client or an agency, and it can understand the information going in between these systems, and more importantly, it can look at what humans are doing with these information when they're using software, and put a digital worker on top of that to perform those tasks for you. So a simple example of that is someone downloading information to prepare a report and sending that off to share with people, or people copying information from one system to another. So those are the general tools. And so you can understand in a way why organizations like Forrester say, well, this is great, we're going to be more efficient. You can actually use these tools to do the same amount of work, but with less people. So if you use that thinking, you're absolutely going to end up with fewer people working on it. The other way of thinking of that is, well, can we take away all those boring tasks, in particular the easiest ones to do, and use that to be more productive? But to help people understand, I think it's worth looking at where this is right now. So this slide you're seeing here it's brand new. It's from the World Economic Forum. Every 2 years produces a report called The Future of Work. And the last two reports, it's had a big focus on artificial intelligence and its impact on the workforce. Everything from self-driving cars through to automated delivery and all of these things in between. And software automation, so robots using software to make decisions and to process things, has become a big focus. And what's interesting is I put a red line down the middle, and what you're looking at is, on the kind of the greeny brown, is the amount of work or task hours that are being done by a machine versus the task hours being done by a computer. And you can see that in the bold you have what the machine will be in 2025, and then the lighter color is where it is now. for looking for information, doing kind of administering tasks, as you might imagine, already half the work hours involved are going to be very quickly up to machines. I think for what's quite interesting for us is a third of reasoning and decision-making hours. That's going to be done by machines, and it's because machines can look for patterns of information to come up with decisions that it can make. The next part of that is, well, once you can reach a decision, it's about communicating that. So coordinating, developing, managing, and advising. We're seeing nearly 30% of human hours being replaced by machine, and that's grown. That's accelerated since 2 years ago. So we have to ask ourselves the question of about, well, what does that mean for our own jobs and what we're doing? And for what we're actually seeing is we're going to see a shift from people whose jobs are very much around doing tasks and admin. So people working in finance, for example, and accounts, they're seeing their jobs being almost completely replaced by machines in the next 2 years. And what does that mean to them in terms of what they're going to do next? So if you flick to the next slide, this is again from the future of work. You can see on the left-hand side down the bottom, you've got a bar that talks about marketing and content production. And so what the World Economic Forum is predicting is people who are in jobs that are being automated are going to try to get into jobs which are involved in these kind of human-centric attributes, things that machines can't do very well. Marketing being one of them. The people who are moving into marketing, what's really interesting, 60% of those people, over 60%, are going to be coming from jobs that have absolutely nothing to do with marketing at the moment. They're going to be coming into our industry from non-related fields, a lot of them from technology as well. And that includes even the areas such as content production. So we're going to have a very different landscape in terms of the people that we're working with in the next 5 years. And so we need to be thinking ourselves as marketers, how does that affect us? What should we be doing now to ensure our value and what we're going to be contributing as individuals over the next 5 years? And I think that oftentimes, go back to that boiling the frog analogy, a lot of times this is happening quite slowly. And so we need sometimes a bit of a wake-up call. Well, hold on, these things are really going to change. What should I be doing now to act to ensure my career, my value in a few years' time? So that kind of takes us into our keys. So we call them keys because we have noticed some key similarities between organizations, both within marketing and advertising and outside, when it comes to learning about and using automation to increase productivity. And the first one isn't too big a surprise, because anyone who's been involved in any kind of digital transformation activity will know that it's very important for an organization to have a goal and to begin with single steps. I think what is quite difficult for us to imagine is well, what does that actually look like from an advertising agency point of view? And I think from an ad agency point of view is to say, we have a goal where we are going to have a level of automation in our business, whether it's in our back office, in our middle office, and what is that going to do for our customer experience?
So I mean, there's the one thing we ask all of our clients, and I think there's always a want to try and automate everything, is find out what the one thing, if you could change one thing in your organization that could be automated, what would it be? And that single thing could be reporting, it could be communication, it could be finance, it could be delivering information and putting in data into a single source that allows you to have numbers in your desk in a morning every day. But what is that one thing that you could change right now that would make a benefit to the organization? And I think that's the first step. Once you've done that, then you can start to move on to then looking at how do you do that to the rest of the organization. But once you have that model, and once people have bought into the strategic direction of automation, then it becomes much easier to implement into the organization.
oftentimes we'll walk into a room and say, okay, can you all agree as a room one thing you hate doing, and we'll just focus on doing that. And it's quite emotional sometimes. People will bring it down to a very granular level of saying, on this particular day we have to do this particular thing and I hate it and I'd never want to do it again. One thing that comes up quite a lot is email. We point out that Google and Microsoft have been trying to solve the conundrum of email for decades, and actually sorting through that. They're two of the most successful companies ever, let alone of recent times, and they haven't been able to crack it. I don't think automation is going to solve that. So we take email off the table when we're talking about automation, I should stress. But if you go to the next slide, what we do is important to do is to do the next key is to research and document processes. Most organizations have business processes which they rely on to create value, but very few of them have actually documented and investigated them to see not only where the strengths and weaknesses are of it, but also what software tools you're using at which point of the process. This is, of course, has the extra benefit of you can actually see very clearly, well, here is a particular point where we have people who are using time to do a very mundane task that we could potentially use a machine to do that. So there's an important part to this in terms of getting people involved in helping to create this understanding of process. And this is a key step in bringing all of the stakeholders together. Which kind of brings us to the next key. Over the course of mapping all of these processes, one of the things that you are able to develop is benchmarks. We mentioned earlier we had figures for Australia, and we have them for Singapore and Hong Kong and all throughout the region, of the amount of time and effort people either waste or spend on admin on a per role basis. So it's an important thing to understand is how am I doing versus my peer group, and where could I potentially get to? So I know, Darren, for example, benchmarks are incredibly important for you into ensuring that individuals have enough time to do the tasks being asked of them when a brand is choosing an agency. We then actually take that amount of task hours that you might have and actually break it down and say, well, how much of that time is actually reasonable to be devoted for work, and how much of it is spent on other things?
Ours have probably come from the opposite, where we set our benchmarks captured on the basis of what it had traditionally taken. So built in there will be the wastage, I guess, in a way that is part of the normal operating procedure.
Exactly, and this is what we have come to expect. And of course, what's happened over time is that waste and that admin actually has increased as a proportion, because as we shift from one task to another, there is a switching cost that's involved, which takes time as we mentally change gears, or literally the physical time it takes to exit from one software platform and go into another software platform to complete a task as well. So we can provide, we have these benchmarks, they are available to understand, and they do vary by region because of cultural differences and different approaches towards productivity in each country. But it's really important to understand where you are to figure out where you want to get to next. The next key is this idea around creating a coalition to declare a war on waste. We mentioned earlier in that first key that having that as a goal or a strategy is super important, but it's really important to bring different stakeholders in. And many of the people watching this may be familiar with the concept of a stakeholder circle, which is what you're seeing in front of you, where people's involvement in a project is mapped so you can determine how influential or how affected they are by a particular project that you're doing, to ensure that they are engaged at different points at the time. We had an instance, for example, with a client who hadn't involved their finance director in a particular project. The MD was on board, the CEO was on board, the chief strategy officer, the COO, the workers who were actually doing the tasks all contribute to the project. And then we hit a massive road bump, which actually paused the project for some time, because the CFO hadn't been consulted and hadn't wrapped his head around it, but of course had the ability to put everything onto hold. So it's really important that organizationally, from the board and the management team, have this idea that they are going to declare a war on waste, and they have this consensus about what's going to be urgent and what's going to be important in terms of what it gets addressed. It's the most successful companies who implement automation all have created this coalition to declare a war on waste. So once you've decided you're going to declare a war on waste, where's the first step? We mentioned that first step. So this year, for the first year, the London School of Economics actually created a specialist course around automation, about where companies can start, what you should do, what's practical to do it. And they too, this is Professor Wilcox and Lassie had researched hundreds of companies around the world who put robotic process automation projects in place. And what they had found is that those who create these miniature centers of excellence, if you want to call it, with a champion to initiate testing and learning, were able to create these proof of concepts to move forward. So they would take a particular pain point, organize a small team, usually a very small budget, to initiate that test and learning. And that's a very key step for people. So if people are thinking about, where do I start with automation? It starts small, and oftentimes it's the champion who's initiating will be someone who's in a marketing department, or someone who's in an operational team in the digital department of an agency. It doesn't need to be someone who is within IT, although IT will often support this center of excellence. And it doesn't need to be anyone with any specific technical knowledge able to initiate this testing and learning phase. Now, while you're doing that, it's really important not to lose sight on what you're trying to do. So quite often what the research had found with Lassie and Wilcox, they found in 2018 that many companies just focus on trying to get an ROI out of automation. The most popular measure for ROI is hours back to the business. So if you remember earlier, we said we had a measure for how much time is wasted. People would then say, okay, what does that equate to hours? When we put the automation in place, how many of those hours will I get back? If I achieve X number of hours, then it's been a success. And that's a really simple place to start. The companies that are most successful, that have a strategic focus, are the ones that say, I want to keep in mind that I'm trying to get a triple play here. I don't just want to create shareholder value by cutting costs. What I want to do is I want to make my employees happier by taking away boring work. And I want to make my customers happy by giving them additional services that they didn't think. So we call that the triple win. So that keeping in mind that strategic as we're going through is a really important step for companies that have moved from the POC phase and have moved into a deployment phase. So getting multiple processes automated, increasing levels of automation. Oftentimes that will be in finance and admin, and increasingly more and more on the operational side. So in the middle office of agencies, for example, is a big area that we're seeing grow.
I mean, one of the I would call it a mistake, I think that's made is taking an initial saving. So if we're looking to save full-time employees across the board on a business, many finance-based resource look to cut those FTEs. The key here is to manage which ones need to be used and which ones need to be saved, and which ones we can start to move around the business into other jobs where they may be more efficient. What we found is 60% of the full-time employees that we were going to save will then be pushed into higher roles, into more prominent roles that are client service, and actually increase the effective value, both from a financial perspective and from a creative perspective, as they start to move through the business and as automation starts to increase within that back office and middle office support. We started off in the back office, which obviously is more a financial piece. This is ever increasing, not just in the middle office, but how we start to work from a front-facing perspective. We're currently working with a business where we've now interlinked back office, middle office, and through to a client or brands-based system. So we now have real-time information and automation that allows them to access information and start to make informed decisions in real time, rather than having that on an ongoing, in periodical perspective. So that's critical for new businesses that are starting to look forward. and try and make waves within what is now become a complex market.
Actually, James makes a really good point there, Darren, because in that case, the back office, which is the finance piece, the invoices, all match with the plans, which match with the data, and then is matched to the contract, which a part of it is performance-based. So now what you've got is you've got real-time outcomes matched with agency performance. So it goes from being something where you're looking at agency performance in the rear-view mirror to something that is actionable and is in real time. So that's a really exciting. You were talking about earlier about how to move to an agency remuneration model, which is more based around performance. Well, surely key to one of those things is knowing how you're performing at any given time with an agreed set of facts. And that's what James is talking about. By bringing the back and the middle office together, we're actually able to match up those data so we have an agreed performance. The last key is probably the most important one. Earlier on, we were talking about how dissatisfied employees were and why they're leaving. So they cite being bored and they're having to do all this unsatisfying work. Michael Mankins, one of my favorite authors when it comes to talking about productivity. He wrote a great book, Time, Talent and Energy. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in organizational performance. He wrote a follow-up piece in the Harvard Business Review where he pointed out that an inspired employee who's happy with what they're doing, they bring more of their discretionary energy to their work each day. So the individual ends up being twice as productive because they're enjoying their work more than what they're doing. So this idea about, instead of using automation simply to keep people doing what they're doing, keeping them happy, but actually at a lower cost. This idea of taking away admin, taking away the boring work so that they can be happier, that in itself creates more productivity as well. So the great companies obsess over productivity, not efficiency. In fact, there's a stat within that report which talks about the strategic focus of different organizations, whether it has been productivity, efficiency, and then what that growth has been as a result. Great examples being companies like Amazon and others who focus on productivity. So that's been the last key that we have seen that have created success for our clients.
Look, that's been terrific. Thank you for taking us through the 7 keys. It's time to ask questions. If any of our attendees have questions, I have one, or probably more than a question, is wanting you to just explain a little bit, because one of the things specifically around ExactAI was that when I first heard about what you were doing, I thought, here we go, here's just another platform. And one of the big challenges, especially marketers have, is their technology stack actually doesn't work very well integrating with each other. But you're actually designed to solve that problem, aren't you? You're not bringing an extra platform that people have to translate to. This is actually a way of connecting platforms and the way of working so that it becomes more automated. Is that right?
Absolutely. We're an unusual software company because we don't measure our success based on how long or people spend using it or how many people are using it. Other software companies need to sell licenses. They need you to be reliant on that software. We're trying to do the opposite. What we're doing is saying, you're using this software, it's great software, it's integrated, you've got a great CRM system, you've got a great data marketing platform. The bit you don't want to do is the human bit of operating it. And because a lot of that operation involves some very tedious tasks. And so our platform connects to marketing clouds and finance systems and SAP to take away that lower value work where humans are literally logging in, doing a task, logging out, doing something else. And then over time, the system learns what people are doing to do progressively more challenging and more difficult tasks that people over time become comfortable allowing the system to automate. So we're not, if you've just invested in Adobe or you've just put in a great workflow system in your agency, this isn't about replacing those things. It's about asking you, well, how much time are you actually spending using this software, and do you want to spend less time doing that?
And James, I imagine it'd be very useful for one of our global clients, their media agency, was trying to explain to them why it took 4 full-time employees just to do their reporting, and how they were downloading from all these different sources and putting it into a report. Is this the type of thing that can be automated?
So we did a lot of research on an agency, and they were on one system. They were spending 2.5 hours a day downloading reports. So they were getting in at 9 o'clock, and at midday they had just finalised the reports that they wanted to send to their client. So it's a third of their day already gone, just sitting there trying to put stuff from a system into Excel. So we've been able to take that away from them. We've taken away not just what is the traditional based media, but a lot of the digital based stuff, which has now freed up something like 35 to 40% of their total productive output, which now goes back to more creative based solutions for their clients. So small things that, again, we find that one thing that if they could change or they could get rid of, what would be the benefit to the business? And in their case, it was a 40% uplift in productive creative output.
And can you imagine how they felt, Darren, those staff? Can you imagine how crushing it was to come and do that every day? And I'm sure their afternoons weren't their best work as a result.
This is why I pick reporting, because one of the biggest complaints that marketers have is that media reporting, post-campaign reporting, campaign reporting, on the run, optimization isn't happening. They say most reports feel like a data dump with no real analysis or insight. I mean, freeing up 4 FTEs from doing that manual labor of just pulling all the data down and letting them actually have that time to do the analysis and developing insights and recommendations improves the outcomes for the marketer and actually frees up those people to do much more interesting work.
Absolutely. And then also from the marketer side, once your agency is providing you recommendations, maybe is to make an adjustment to a campaign that's currently running, automation has a role there as well, because you can determine what things you are happy for the decisions to be made on your behalf to change the campaign. And this could be happening at any time. And marketers like to take holidays too. And I'm sure that we would love the idea of this intelligent automation helping us make great marketing decisions while we're sitting in the sun, hopefully in what's going to be sunny Queensland or somewhere nice this particular Christmas. So that's the promise. But I go back to that thing again, is we have to rid ourselves this way. I think that we can only use technology to produce the same thing, but with less resource. This idea is we can free people up to not only get productivity by freeing time, but making them happier people, making them happier, more productive employees.
So if there's either agencies or marketers or consultants that are viewing this, what's the best way to get in touch to have a conversation with you guys?
You can find us at ExactAI.com. That's the easiest way, and just you can contact us, reach out to us on LinkedIn. Happy to talk to you about what we've learned, not just here in Australia, but across the region in the UK and the US, as we've been talking with customers who are trying to get rid of waste and admin.
Well, look, I want to thank both of you for making the time available today. Thank you, James, and thank you, Shane.
Great. Thank you very much for organising this, Darren. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope it's been valuable for everyone who's been listening.
Terrific.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Now, here we go. The recording of this workshop will be available in the next 24 hours. You'll be able to find it. Well, I will send you an email, but it's at trinityp3.com/webinars. If you've not already, I ask you to subscribe at trinityp3.com/subscribe to stay up to date with all the things that are going on. Because believe me, this year has been a great opportunity for us to go into overdrive, providing more ways of keeping yourselves abreast of what's happening in the industry. We do have a final workshop, a webinar, free webinar next week. That'll be the last one for the year. We've actually done 18 webinars this year. This one's called Why Measuring Your Carbon Pollution is the First Step to Sustainability. And that will be for Christopher Sewell from the Gaia Partnership and Phil Benedictus from Benedictus Media, who is the inaugural Climate Comms Champion, awarded 2 weeks ago at Mumbrella 360. You can see all of the events coming up at trinityp3.com/business events. Again, final thank you to both of you for making time. And as always, if you require any more information, we're Sydney, Singapore, London, New York, and Zurich, and all of these social media channels. Thank you very much, and we hope you have a great day.